we're going to get into our next talk. Now, our next speaker, she and I remember, met at a, believe it or not, another performance conference. A unfortunately short-lived one in London called Delta V. Whoever remembers that, hands in the air. Yep. Pour a little coffee on the ground for them. But yeah, it was a fantastic conference. But again, unfortunately short-lived. Happened for the one edition. But she presented then, and we met at that point, and I remember the after party, we kicked it and just had a good time. But here to talk about performance culture is Dora Militaru.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Henri. And someone finally pronounced my name correctly, which is awesome. I'm really honored to be here. So thank you so much. And good morning. And you're all lovely 3D people. So I'm going to start with a caveat. My voice is weird today, and I'm still feeling a bit squiffy from a cold. So if you could please just forgive me in general today. That would be very lovely. So I'm Dora Militaru. I'm on Twitter at my name, and I live in London with my family and our 2 cats and a domesticated fox called Franklin. And no, it's true. My goal is to give you a rounded view of performance culture based on what the experts say. And if I do my job right today, you'll walk away with some food for thought and with a framework to kind of understand where you and your team fit in with everything. So yeah, web performance. It can mean a lot of things for different people, but fundamentally it's a question of how fast a web page is. But there's more to it than that, because there's a difference between a page that's built for speed and a page that feels fast. So the perception of speed is just as important as any objective measurement, and it's trickier to quantify. But let's try. So you need to know that, secretly, microwaves are like evil time machines. Therefore, 3 minutes in a microwave will always feel like forever. But the same time kind of flies when you're listening to your favorite song. I just did that. Cool. Thank you for humoring me. So yeah, our intuition says that faster is better, and that makes sense. And we've known now for a long time that speed matters. So when I was researching this talk, I came across a pretty vintage case study, and it was presented by Marissa Mayer at the time at Google at the Web 2.0 Summit in 2006. So Google ran a user study to, they asked users how many search results they would like to see on a page. So same as today, Google at the time normally showed 10 search results on each page. And the user vote was unanimous. Everybody wanted 30 search results, and that was the maximum offer. So more is more. So Google ran an A/B test where they increased the number of search results to 30. And then what happened is that in the experimental bucket, traffic from search dropped by 25% in less than 6 weeks. Like, ouch. The users asked for that. Why did they change their mind? Why are they hating it so much? So at the time, Google's revenue from search traffic was around $10 billion annually. And this was going to be a decision that, getting this particular test right or wrong could have either generated or swung $2.5 billion, which is a huge number. So Marissa's team were rightfully quite frustrated at this point. They had a lot of hypotheses. Maybe it was the paradox of choice. Maybe, I don't know, users just weren't clicking next anymore because they had more results on the first page, so they weren't making any extra searches. But in the end, it was the cold, hard data that explained the traffic slump. So the page with 10 results took 0.4 seconds to generate. The page with 30 results took 0.9 seconds. And the conclusion was users really respond to speed. And half a second, right, 500 milliseconds is all it takes to kill user experience and disappoint a lot of people and lose $2.5 billion. And these are the kinds of parameters that web performance optimization usually operates with. We're 16 years later now. We have better hardware, but also our applications are more complex and user expectations have grown proportionally, but speed still matters. And we've come to have a deep understanding of the value proposition of web performance. If you go to wpostats.com, which is curated by Tammy Everts and Tim Cadillac in the room today, you'll find lots of case studies that show that good performance is good for business and that faster user experiences with fewer errors mean sort of increased usage and conversion and revenue and all that. Now, performance is rarely the single determinant of a product success, but as our understanding of metrics evolves, there's a bit of a lag when I do the animation, sorry. So does our ability to fine-tune these metrics to business goals. And if good performance is good for business, bad performance is bad for everyone. Because embedded in the term web performance is the word web, which, as Sir Tim Berners-Lee put it ages ago, the web is for everyone. And on the web, performance is kind of foundational to access, because the more sites that are too slow or too expensive to access for some, the wider the inequality gap becomes between rich and poor users. And so our true mission, the true mission of web performance is to expand access to information and services for everyone. And what I really love about our community is that you're basically all a bunch of good eggs. And I think that you care sincerely about making things better for everyone, and also about sustainability. And you're not just in it for the money or intellectual workout. And it's been great to see folks like Bruce, Robin, and Tim make genuine and meaningful efforts to understand and to start to dismantle some of the privilege that comes built into the system. Web performance as a discipline is becoming more and more accessible, and we've been doing that for the better part of the past 3 decades. So we have a tremendous body of intellectual work, and this is from foundational theory to best practices that people iterate on, to giving people the tools to advocate for performance in their organizations, and to more like ontological work around the business side of web performance and the psychology of web performance. That's the one by Tammy Everts. In fact, I think probably a few authors from this slide are in the room today. Please raise your hand if it's you. Okay. It's not such a daunting audience then. Okay, right now is a very exciting time looking at all the advances in browser tooling, automated evaluation, lab tools, runtimes, API standards. So Katie Hempenius spoke about loads of great things last morning. And then debugging tools are becoming increasingly automated and self-serve, which means that it's now much easier for regular engineers who aren't experts to iterate on faster experiences. And yet, outside our very specific community, most engineering teams still struggle to deliver consistently on web performance. Yesterday, Tammy shared the Shopzilla case study when she's talking about web performance regressions. What came to my mind was a moment during Katie Hempenius and Adi Osmani's talk at Google I/O 2019, which I remember very well because I actually got married during that conference, a story for a break time, if you want to know. So they referred to an internal study by Google that found that 40% of large brands regress on web performance within 6 months, which is an astounding number. But if you think about it, it's not that surprising. This is because teams want to build faster experiences, and they will, given a chance. But most of the time, this means doing, the actual web performance optimization work instead of dealing with any organizational constraints that cause the site to perform slowly in the first place. And so the slowness kind of tends to creep back in over time, because getting fast is one thing, and then staying fast is a whole nother business. And that's why, over the years, lots of folks have stressed that it's really important to foster a culture of performance inside of organizations. So Lara Hogan, Tim Cadillac, Jose Perez, Tammy have all written or spoken about what it means to have a strong performance culture and how you get there. Tim Kellick actually formulated the key characteristics of strong performance cultures. So, strong performance cultures have top-down support. They're data-driven. They rely on clear targets and automation and knowledge sharing and on building a culture of experimentation. And a strong performance culture is always user-focused and not tool-focused. So what I'm trying to get at is that culture is the magic sauce. And culture is all about institutional knowledge and institutionalized ways of working, which makes it a management issue. So do we have any managers here? PMs? Can you? Yay. So I was speaking to Alex Russell during one of the breaks yesterday, and he said that talking to managers is all about finding the right analogy. And then he said something about teaching aliens to distinguish between the ends of the digestive tract. So if you need to... So if you need an excuse to talk to Alex today, here's your icebreaker. You're welcome. I think I maxed out on my own analogy budget with the Rickroll, so I don't really have another one. But what I do have is like a jolly good management maturity model for performance. And this is abridged and slightly adapted from Alex Russell's excellent work on the topic. But performance maturity models aren't a new idea. So Colin Marshall from NCC Group gave a talk about this in 2016. Last year, Matt Ball wrote about it in a blog post for Splunk. He called it the performance maturity curve. But I wanted to distill Alex's thinking into a memorable visual metaphor. Here it is. This is the performance maturity ziggurat. So thank you. A ziggurat is this like stepped pyramid, temple, tower thing and not something you smoke. And I like this representation. I'm on a roll. I like this representation over other models because I think it reflects that performance maturity is a step progression. And there are 5 levels that I go into later. So they're reactive, tactical, operational, cultural, and then strategic maturity. Fun fact, as I was researching, I found that this is exactly the structure that the US of A organized tactical warfare in. Truly no connection to web performance. But yeah, advancing on this journey requires increasing levels of maturity. That's both technical maturity and organizational maturity, and each step builds and then it depends on a previous phase. And as your team climbs higher, you go from serving your tools to serving your users. And then your locus of control also starts shifting inwards because you go from performance regressions happen to our system to performance regressions are something that we anticipate and can plan for. And then the higher you climb, the more understanding you gain about your users. Thank you, computer. And as you master your systems, you accumulate the knowledge and the confidence to make those intentional technology trade-offs so that eventually you can think about succeeding on any stack. And then, as you go up, the value of performance starts becoming clearer and clearer for your service or your vertical. And delivering consistently good experiences becomes sustainable. Okay, without further ado, most teams start off at this reactive maturity level, where things just tend to go fine for a while, and then when they start dealing with performance issues, it's basically firefighting on a loop. And this is in part because managers at this level have an undeveloped understanding of how performance can be a really serious product issue. And maybe it's because they've been blindsided by some hype technology that came built in with big performance promises, or maybe it's the day after the big rewrite, and now the business metrics are tanking, the prototype is fast. Story all too common. So at this stage, teams care less about improving speed and more about fixing slowness that directly correlates with losing revenue. When I say slowness, I mean a really noticeable degradation in performance. So things are real slow. People with modern laptops and high-powered smartphones and low-latency networks notice that something's wrong, and executives start asking questions. So this is a fire, and nobody has a strong theory about what's wrong. So an investigation starts and uncovers a pile of potential metrics and data points to worry about, maybe from business analytics or some kind of other tooling. And here, reactive teams, they don't tend to plan or staff for continuous attention to details like metrics. And so the systems become more untrustworthy with each fire. Okay. Then you start the remediation process, which takes time and pain and stress and tears, and you've picked some metrics at this point that seem related to the problem, and you track them throughout. But are they the right ones? If we track them from now on, does that keep things from going bad? And eventually, you put the fire out, and you have a little celebration, a sigh of relief, and maybe you get a metrics dashboard or two out of it. And off you go on to the next performance regression. Don't treat each develop, fix, celebrate cycle like it's your last time. Because if you fail to focus on integrating learning from an incident, and you don't start to continually report on metrics along important user journeys, then bad things will just keep happening. And leadership might celebrate the first fire you put out. But by the third, they're going to start asking some questions like, what's wrong with your architecture? What's wrong with your team? And if you lose the organization's confidence, you've basically tanked team potential and individual potential. And everyone's confidence drops. And this is really bad. So as you've seen, reactive teams tend to regard the performance of their service in terms of uptime or downtime. It's because you don't yet have a developed understanding of your users' behavior beyond what happens when things go wrong. You don't have continuous monitoring set up, or maybe you do, but nobody's keeping an eye on it. So the data that you collect is incidental or collected passively. And you may not even be aware that it's much easier these days to benchmark and measure end-user experience. Either way, you're not consistently reviewing any performance metrics, and you're not considering them when you're setting KPIs and OKRs. So the immediate goals need to be addressing all of that. Because you can't improve what you aren't measuring, and you can't resolve what you don't know about. And good PMs at this point, they see performance firefighting for what it is, a service outage. And they start to adopt theory from incident response framing, like PySearl up there. And they apply principles of observability cultures, like having blameless postmortems, and then they use all the collective learning processes from remediation to improve the team's understanding of its systems. So at this point that you're making discoveries about the patterns and the bad practices that lead to slowness, and you need to share and celebrate that. That's crucial, as is creating dashboards and requesting reports about things that may have caused problems in the past. Okay. Good managers also start to look for more general industry standard metrics to report against their data. So at this point, maybe you want to lead with page experience signals like Core Web Vitals because of their correlation with real user experiences. And it's also a good thing that Google is holding websites accountable for their performance. That's a big step forward for all of us, I think. And also, if your team has struggled to get executive buy-in for performance work in the past, Core Web Vitals makes a strong business case for investing in optimization. Right? They may not even be the analytics that matter most or correlate to your business goals, but they're way better than nothing. Now is also a good time to develop RUM infrastructure and to begin to report to management against the aggregates for user journeys that matter the most. Reactive teams face their own set of challenges, which may prevent them from progressing and stepping up. The first is inconsistent velocity of delivery. So noticeable performance degradation means that an existing feature is working below spec. So your time spent fighting fires comes out of the time that you would be spending on building new features, and that means roadmap delays. The second risk is that some managers fail to spot the opportunities that lie beyond firefighting. And those are the sort of people that just don't understand how much stress firefighting places on teams. So this development, fix, or remediation and then celebration loop, this gets demoralizing really fast for any top performance because top performers hate failing to deliver. And those people leave, which is bad. But there are good managers too, and those are the sorts of people who get fed up quickly when repeated incidents start cutting into schedules and they hurt team morale and create questions about system architecture and health. And they see the need to recalibrate what what their previous expectations were around what is reasonable performance, and acting on that is tactical management maturity. So being proactive about performance improvements has a side effect of stabilizing delivery. It reduces stress on a team, and it creates some space to refocus on product success. Cool. Tactical teams start their journey with acceptance. We don't know what we don't know. And you accept that the system is complex and must be investigated, rather than fully modeled. And you start to benchmark and measure end user experience for the average user. And you start a process of auditing metrics and selecting the ones that are most relevant for user experience. And these metrics are going to be what influences future investment. So picking the right ones also helps your team to avoid firefighting and have blind spots in the future. And there are just so many browser and tool vendor data points to choose from. And I'll forgive you if it feels daunting to understand what to measure and manage at this point. So I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Nick and Tammy for their super insightful talks about metrics yesterday. And Tammy gave us a really solid framework for auditing metrics. So here it is again. I've included the link to the entire deck at the bottom. So how to score metrics? Score metrics on meaningful content, usability out of the box, broad browser support, lab and field data availability, and correlation to business or UX goals. That's the way to go. Not too hard. And once you've selected the best metrics for the most important user journeys, you're going to want to track them against lab and field data. Your data may not be dimensional yet. You're not slicing and dicing by browser or device or geography, and that's okay right now. Because you're now beginning to understand that lab or synthetic measurements can't always predict a system's behavior out there in the field, so you need to calibrate for minimally acceptable performance some other way. And this usually means starting from a global baseline of system and network capabilities that you're going to want to target. By the way, the TDL for the assertion on this slide is 6 hours until Alex's closing talk on the global baseline. No spoilers. So you are no longer blinded by the fog of measurements from the reactive phase. Instead, you have metrics that are meaningful to user experience on which you report continually rather than incidentally. And you use synthetic or lab and RUM, real user measurement, or field data. So the lessons that you've learned spread from the cycles of firefighting and become institutionalized knowledge. This is progress. And good managers begin to understand that performance is a cross-cutting concern, meaning that it's something that affects everything else, and it should be managed as such. So performance is part of the product commons, along with accessibility, security, privacy, UX, testability, and so on. And any single one of these components can cause a regression latency, and that's something you need to be on the lookout for. Conversely, improving performance opens up space to be fallible in other areas. Baby steps towards a culture of experimentation, which Tim said is a good thing. And experimentation is integral to a strong performance culture, actually. More on that later. Good tactical managers understand that, at this point we have a global view of data, and that may be useful, but it fails to map directly onto your own product experience. So you start to look for better and more situated data that describes more of the user journeys that you care about. So now that you're tracking these metrics that are meaningful to user experience, you can work with your tech leads to start setting expectations against metrics. And you can begin to be better at describing performance work in terms of business value. And you can start fostering a shared sense of ownership over this. And that means starting to write in performance goals into KPIs and OKRs and all that. What stops teams moving past the stage is the risk of drowning in metrics, which is a very real risk when you just have too many data points that you're collecting and slicing, and that's why audits shouldn't be a one-shot exercise. There's also a risk that at this stage, the space to watch and manage metrics is swallowed out by some kind of pressure from product. So pushing back on these pressures will depend on your ability to confidently answer management questions when it comes to performance work. The next phase is operational maturity. So good managers and good tech leads, they understand that global numbers aren't the full picture at this point, and they're right. And there's a big shift in internal team dialogue, and everybody becomes a bit of a scientist. And for the first time, you are able to communicate confidently about the impact of performance work using really good and relevant numbers, and this is really exciting now, because everyone starts thinking in percentiles and distributions, and you stop talking about averages. And at this point, you know the difference between median and mean. So speed, in addition to reducing latency, becomes a question of managing variance. A driving principle at this stage is we need to understand what we don't know. And you're itching to explore how your system behaves differently at the median versus the margins of your distribution. And the same goes for user behavior. Operational teams, they start to document important user journeys. And they start to track the influence of performance across the entire conversion funnel. So you may want to start to introduce metrics that aren't industry standard, but are more sensitive and represent your business outcomes more accurately. And then percentiles and histograms are the only way you talk about RUM data from this point on. Nobody says averages anymore. Most charts that you look at will have 3 lines, P75, P90, P95. I think I forgot one, sorry about that. And the median is thrown in as a vanity metric so that other parts of the business feel that this is a legible graph. And everything is a distribution, which is good for comparison and experimentation because you now have a language to describe non-binary shifts. And then success becomes a question of moving traffic from one bucket of the histogram across to another. At this point, you begin to read industry research and also understand that LCP can vary between visits and viewports. And you begin to instinctively look towards the long tail of distributions. And you take a really good hard look at your tools. You want to start dropping the ones that don't report RUM data in more sliceable ways like percentile or geography or device class. And you invest a bunch of effort into developing and maintaining custom metrics and tools. You're going to want to track RUM against metrics that are important to your website, like, I don't know, CLS versus bounce rate. And you want to remember the part in Nick's talk yesterday where he speaks about bias in RUM measurement tools. And you're going to want to run lab tests in less noisy environments. So that's not your developer's laptop or a shared server or a VM that comes with built-in variants. Low noise is important because teams that have reached operational maturity understand that if the environment is polluted. You can't trust your measurements. And your mission to improve latency and reduce variance starts allowing you to test more product hypotheses because you have less noise. Crucially, what you need to do at this point, you need to integrate run reporting into whatever your experimentation setup is, so that you can start attributing performance impact to changes. And you begin to start experimenting more confidently and pouring the foundation for that culture of experimentation. Okay, so again, teams that have reached this level of maturity are already pretty effective and specialized, but they face some risks. They regress because sometimes people start arguing about, I don't know, the relative value of RUM versus lab data, and don't necessarily understand that advanced teams collect both at the same time, and then they try to cross-correlate. And people are also naturally prone to tunnel vision, especially when they've worked on a custom metric, which takes time and effort to come up with, all those 3 letters. Chase the wrong numbers here, and you risk missing the point entirely. Like, does hitting your FID target actually represent increased conversion? Move past that, and you've reached the next phase, which is cultural maturity. And teams that reach this phase, they relish the stability it brings. This is when you're able to forecast performance regressions because you have all the tooling and all the maths in your head to begin to talk and think about it. And then you can start avoiding performance regressions altogether because you're beginning to implement the right management processes and tools. And speed becomes about preserving and protecting established ways of working, and everybody's generally happy. Teams that reach cultural maturity, they understand that innocent-looking changes begin to add up and slowness creeps back in. You also know which user flows are critical for the success of your product and what sort of changes are likely to add latency. And your focus shifts to the long term and avoiding cultural regression. You're going to want to build something called performance quality gates. Or ship gates. So these are automated tests that run on CI, and they watch the performance of your PRs through a commit queue and block any changes that tank the performance of important user flows. This implies that you have developed metrics which you know correlate well with user and business success, and it also implies that you've developed a good understanding of which user flows and scenarios are worth automating. Because these tests are expensive to run, so you have to choose well. Oh yeah, use field and lab data. That's quite important. Teams that reach cultural maturity, they manage to avoid this sort of reactive remediation firefighting. Because good managers follow the Cullen, Elliott, McCrae school of acquiring technology as your team scales, which is to keep using a small number of small and known tools. And you're cautious at this point about jumping on any hype trains, and you've stopped believing in silver bullets. Now, having said that, a good manager doesn't actually shy away from adopting a new technology, even if it requires more work, if that new technology is better for performance. So, culturally mature teams are charting a course based on better information. You have continuous monitoring, which includes data from both the lab and the field, and that helps you guard against metric drift. You also start to alert on cumulative, like month over month, quarter over quarter, or year over year changes. And crucially, this lets your team identify and raise slow bleed regressions before they become fires. And this is something you have to reward people for. At this point, you don't only set, but also regularly revisit performance budgets. And you explicitly staff a performance team or assemble a group of experts, whatever, and their job is to run investigations and drive the infrastructure to better inform this process of inquiry. Culturally mature teams are in a stronger position to push back and make demands about the product because you're fighting featureitis. And that quote is from a book that I really enjoyed reading last month called The Design of Everyday Things. It's a bit of a cult classic, but featureitis was actually coined by one of the early Unix developers in the 70s to describe something that's probably annoyingly familiar. So it's easy for marketing pressures, this is a quote from the book, it's easy for marketing pressures to insist upon the addition of new features, but there is no call, or for that matter, budget to get rid of old, unneeded ones. And this led me to remember something that really impressed me early in my career, and it made me realize that we don't use this concept enough to talk about web performance, which is something called software apoptosis. Apoptosis is a process that happens in nature, and it's basically programmed cell death. This is a very ordered and orchestrated process that occurs in multicellular organisms. So someone called Matt Chadburn, who I used to work with, applied this principle to software. I used to work at the Financial Times, and I worked on the FT.com. And I was really impressed by how we leveraged feature flags. So anything new that was released or added to a website was wrapped up in a feature flag so that we could do A/B testing and all sorts of fun things like that with it. But crucially, the A/B test had a set expiry date. And when it reached, not the A/B test, sorry, the feature flag, and when you reach that date, your manager has to argue to keep that feature in the system. And you need to start answering questions like, do we still need it? Does it still perform well? Or, do we have to make improvements to it at this stage? Have we had problems with it? And so on. And I really think that this is a valuable mindset to adopt for web performance. I don't know why we don't do it more often. Right. So obviously, I'm going to talk about threats now. And the biggest threat to your team at this level is turnover in product or engineering leadership. So your team has achieved cultural maturity, so your ways of working have stabilized a bit. But cultures are the sort of thing that you need to actively defend and reinforce to even maintain the status quo. So you need to be cautious about who you hire or promote at this point. Okay, last but not least, top of the ziggurat, teams that reach strategic maturity. Unicorns. These are teams that have fully institutionalized performance management as a discipline, and they've come to understand it as a strategic asset. They're rare and immensely valuable to the organization, also immensely valuable to our community. These teams have built management structures and the technical foundations to grow their performance lead and prevent cultural regressions. So performance culture becomes a strategic asset to the company. Speed is about creating value. These teams, they've mastered their systems, and they now serve their users, not their tools. There's no performance cops, no performance janitors. And when it comes to users, we've developed an understanding that faster is better with one condition. It's only better when it serves the user needs. If you're on a strategically mature team, you tend to be performance evangelists. So you're the ones who organize the internal training, conduct external advocacy, go to conferences, you write a lot, and you do research to push the boundaries of performance improvement work. You also want to enforce latency budgets, but not for feature releases, not for featureitis, for fractional rollouts. When business leaders demand the ability to ramp slow features into your thing, you're empowered to say no based on that latency budget. And at this point, you're also empowered to choose the better performing option, even if it takes more work to operate. So you start making these intelligent trade-offs as your natural day-to-day work. And you routinely benchmark against what your competitor's doing on your important user flows. Strategy is what you do differently from the competition. Your way of working is a larger advantage than any single optimization, and you're going to want to protect that. And to do that, you have, and you need to continue to have, the full support of the business. And that tends to be something you earn because you've managed to tie performance to product success. A strategically mature organization relies on its cultural norms to deliver experiences, great experiences with consistent quality. And these norms are the competitive advantage in effect. So to protect them, you're going to need to put some serious training and guardrails in place to protect against cultural regression whenever someone new joins your team, for example. And strategically mature organizations also reward its people generously. So you have performance-aligned incentives. Maybe you give people a monetary reward or time off for flagging something before it becomes a bigger problem. Strategically mature teams, as rare and stable as they are, they still run the risk of regressing. And that tends to happen because there's some kind of political pressure from other parts of the business that undermines leadership. So people leave or they're driven out. Sometimes it's because you failed to reward continual improvement. And then all the hard work you did to win institutional knowledge and understand what it takes to excel, all of that goes out the window. So you need to be on guard regarding your culture and your value to the organization as much as about your system's health. Recap. The performance maturity ziggurat. As you climb up it, your understanding of users improves. You become masters of your systems. You begin to understand, be able to explain in clear business terms what the value of performance is. And thus lies, or therein lies, the path to sustainability and avoiding those performance regressions. So like I said, this was work that was abridged and adapted from some fantastic work that Alex Russell did. And to quote Alex Russell, everyone wants to do a great job, but it's the manager's role to define what that actually means. And I really invite you to just go and read Alex's blog post on this matter. He provides, oh God, why did I animate this individually? Sorry. I did not mean to do that. Cool. He provides a list of questions for senior managers that help your organization see where you place in this performance maturity model. And I've only written down the headings here, so you can start to understand what kinds of questions those are. In my view, the questions are the most important piece of that blog post. But please go and read it anyway. His much more coherent than I can ever be, and it's a really enjoyable read. So yeah, thanks. Keep in touch.
Thank you, thank you. No, I'm not going to put this on because I'm a little warm. Won't you join us for a few questions? What a fantastic talk. First of all, I just want to say, amazing slides.
Thank you.
I was just sitting there like, oh my God, I'm a failure. Beautiful slides, like big, I loved it.
I don't know if you remember, but I used to make a point of having just GIFs for slides.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I've spared you that today.
I'm not going to get into the pronunciation of GIFs. We could deal with that after.
It is GIFs, isn't it?
I mean, I'm not going to put a poll on Twitter, but I don't know. I'm a fan of grammar, so I say GIFs. But whatever, that's just me. Thank you very much for that talk. Let's go through a few. I was just furiously jotting down some stuff that I want to talk to you about. Now, the one of the things I did, of the many, you talked about the culture of experimentation. And that really kind of struck a chord simply because I always felt that the idea, like in performance, as you mentioned, you had that again, a beautiful slide with all the metrics and whatnot. And I think a lot of that came from experimentation. Like, how would you sort of go about letting a team know that, this is part of what they should be doing?
It's all top-down support. Tammy spoke about this in 2019 at this conference. But what you want your managers to understand is that teams, particularly at lower levels of maturity, once they have metrics, they begin to fear that whatever work they're doing is going to tank those metrics, and you want to put the systems in place that let people know about the impact they're having before it's a problem. So you start doing things like ship gates or having some kind of canary releases. So the FT had quite a complex system for deploying VCL configuration to Fastly and verifying that everything works. And I, who knew no VCL and was very green engineer, maybe like 2 months into my career, because of the way that was set up, I didn't fear making changes to it.
Awesome. Another thing, you mentioned that book, but with the section around like featureitis, I thought that was pretty comical as well. And, it made me think of, the big week over in California, and everyone was kind of going nuts over these new features that a particular framework was coming out with. Yes. How do you get also that out of, because I find that a lot of, there's certainly a group of developers who are like, oh my God, have you seen the new release of this? And they basically drop the other one overnight, and they go into this new sort of feature and whatnot. Like, how do you, again, sort of, have that kind of understanding that, hey, this has to go through like a battery of sort of testing and experimentation and not, have people go look at the new shiny thing, AKA Pyrite.
Right. So at this point, we're talking about features in the technology rather than product features, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to want to go back and read that old and very cynical and really amazing post by Kellen Elliott McRae. I forgot what it's called, but I have it bookmarked, so I don't need to remember it. Just search his name, or I'll put the slides up, whatever. And he provides a list of questions for evaluating how you adopt new technology. But spoiler alert, those questions are pretty biased, and as teams grow in maturity, the default response starts to be, okay, stick with what you know works. Don't fix it if it's not broken.
Awesome. We could find you on Twitter, I guess, if we have any additional questions.
Yes, but you'll have to spell my name. Good luck.
All right. And my last question is this. Dora, ye owner of a MG convertible, how's the MG doing?
Went to the scrapyard, but if anyone's passionate about cars, I can fill you in on all the performance optimization I did with my own 2 hands during the pandemic.
Amazing.
Like fitting a new exhaust. I'm proud of that.
All right. Well, give it up for Dora, please.